Hey, everybody, welcome. I'm Natalie, and this is Scientology Life After a Cult. Thank you so much, moderators, for being here, the members, and everybody in the live chat. I appreciate it. If you're on the replay, jump in those comments. Today, I'm going to be talking to Jon Atack. Many of you are familiar with him. He wrote Let's Sell Them a Piece of Blue Sky. He's a former Scientologist that turned whistleblower, wrote multiple books, actually, and has been helping to expose Scientology, the lies of Elon Hubbard, the lies of Scientology ever since. We had our first conversation a couple of weeks ago, and we did not get to all of the questions, mainly because I was hogging him for myself and getting my own questions answered. But today it's going to be about you and not about me. But help me out. Put question in front of your question so I can see it easier, mark it, and grab as many as we possibly can as we go along. Hey, Farrell Cheryl, good to see you. Marcy, thank you so much for being here. Northern Girl, thank you too. Jersey Jan, good to see you. And I think we're ready to get going. I'm going to introduce here my guest today, who is Jon Atack. Welcome. Here we are. Now, we talked about a lot the last time, and if anyone's watching, you don't have seen the video before to keep track of what we're going to talk about today. But if you did not see it, I recommend going back. In fact, I'm going to remember, if one of the mods could help me remember to add the link in the description of this video of the previous interview with Jon, that would be awesome. I will even write myself a little note. And so between all that, I ought to be able to pull it off. I thought we could get into, kind of kick it off with what Bob, I'm just laughing at Bob here. Tone it down, Natalie.
It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen, Bob. Sorry.
Oh, I see Bob in the chat more and more. He's great. I don't know who you are, Bob, but I like you. I thought we could start things off with some of the more, there's certain lies about L. Ron Hubbard that we know about, we've talked about, but I feel like because of the book that you wrote, really exposing the lies about L. Ron Hubbard, there's a few we could kind of start with, and I'll start some questions, but we can start talking about some of those common, well-known or not so well-known lies that Scientology has put forth about their founder, L. Ron Hubbard.
And it was a real starting point for me. Said last week, a journalist called Michael Lynn Shannon had done a lot of research and then disappeared off the face of the earth. And I tried to find him for years just to thank him for the work he'd done. And he put together a lot of documents, like, Hubbard's college records, for example. And you look at this stuff, and of course, you're a true believer. You look at it and you kind of go, yeah, well, it's all made up. It's all fake. So I then went on the journey to find out what was true and what was not true. And almost nothing was true. So to give an example of that, his college grade sheets at George Washington University show that he failed the course in atomic and molecular physics. Now, he would later frequently claim that he was a nuclear physicist.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember hearing that and thinking, oh, L. Ron Hubbard's a nuclear physicist. How cool is that?
Yeah.
Not.
And, the people that he went to college with did the Manhattan Project and all of this. Absolute nonsense. He never studied nuclear physics. He studied atomic and molecular physics, which is a different order of fish. And there it is. There's the grade sheet, says an F grade. Now, it just so happens that L. Ron Hubbard, on the 23rd of September, 1950, recorded a lecture called Introduction to Dianetics. And in his infinite wisdom in the golden age of tech, David Miscavage decided to release this. I don't think he listened to any of these lectures. And in this lecture, we have L. Ron Hubbard saying, I failed the course in atomic and molecular physics. So he'll make these wild claims and then he'll contradict them. I got 22 of the official biographies and just ran them side by side. I got the Mission into Time one and used that as the center and looked at the contradictions between the biographies. Now, these are all things that were either interviews with Hubbard or are copyrighted to Hubbard or were said by Hubbard. So in Mission into Time, it says that the introduction is written by the editors, but the book is copyrighted to Orrin Hubbard. So he has to own everything that's said in it. So if you take the earliest grand fabulism, it's that he was a blood brother of the Blackfoot Bikuni people.
That's one of the Ron mags, I believe, that they put out with that claim. They did a whole magazine about it. Scientology did.
Yeah. And I found 3 places where he makes the claim. In one, he says he was 2 years old. In one, he says he was 4 years old. And the other, he says he was 6 years old. So he probably had 3 bodies. So there's it's easy to solve that one. Or a very bad memory, which is not a good thing if he was meant to be remembering our last 60, 73 or 76 trillion years. One would like him to have had a good memory. But so he says these things, and there are various strands of research. I was in a deposition with Kendrick Moxon, Toxic Moxon, one of the 38 unindicted co-conspirators from the Guardian's office case.
I forget that. I want to touch on that quick. I didn't realize until recently that Kendrick Moxon was one of the unindicted co-conspirators in that case.
Yes.
That's so crazy. And he's still, can I ask you, not to derail too much, what is your take on him? How is it? The man's a Scientologist. He's up there, bridge to total freedom. His daughter unalived herself in a tragic way while a Sea Org member, like, what's that guy's deal? How is he still working for Scientology and doing, it sounds like Kendrick Moxon these days handles some of the smaller cases.
Yeah, I think it's the same for all of us, that we get involved with something, we believe in it, and we then follow what's called the consistency principle or the commitment principle, or the sunk cost fallacy, throwing good money after bad. So we want to believe, we exclude any information that disagrees with us. We have confirmation or my side bias, so that we only permit information that agrees with us. And I've met so many highly intelligent, well-meaning, decent people who got into Scientology and got stuck. And there they were for decades. And one of those, an aspect of that which has interested me for the last 10 years is something called a weaponized empath. And so you take somebody who really wants to do good in the world and you tell them, but unfortunately, you're going to have to kill these people before goodness will come along. So even among the Nazis, there were people who appear to have actually been empaths, people who were compassionate and caring, but they were persuaded that for the good of the Aryan people, nonsense, that they would have to kill Romani, Jews, Slavs, anybody that got in the way. That's called doubling. Robert J. Lifton, who wrote The Nazi Doctors and interviewed doctors who'd been doing these horrible things in Dachau and Buchenwald. And he interviewed them and he found that, the gangster looks so scary with his Luger in his hand, but when he gets home to his children, he's a family man. That's Sir Michael Jagger with the Rolling Stones, that piece of philosophical wisdom. And it's true that you can see, we like to think of this kind of black and white, that there are psychopaths who are evil, and that's that. Yeah. But in fact, there are a lot of people who are decent in some ways, kind, considerate in some ways, but only towards people who you fit into their, designation of goodness. So they might be Christians and they'll go and kill infidels, or, they might be whatever. So I think with Kendrick Moxon, I only met him, 2 days, and he was bloody annoying, actually. And we went in, and because he was coming over here to do a deposition, they violated the law to do it, which they do. Under English law, you can't actually have a deposition unless the person has refused to testify. And the thought of being put up in a nice hotel in California to testify, I would have done it. I was never asked, and they got a deposition order, which was kind of wrong. But what happens here is that a trial lawyer, and we call them barristers, doesn't mean the same as in the US, only lawyer who argues cases is called a barrister here.
Mm-hmm.
The others are called solicitors who prepare the cases. So they had to have a barrister in the room who'd kind of act as the judge. And on the second day, as we were walking in, I'm alongside the barrister. He said, "He's an awful man, isn't he? An awful man." And it's like, he's meant to be kind of independent, but he's seen the first day of this guy going at me, and he's like, "No, this is horrible." So it came up that Kendrick Mox said, "Well, L. Ron Hubbard was a blood brother of the Blackfoot Bikini Indians." And I said, "No, he wasn't." And he said, "Here is a letter from a member of the tribal council of the Blackfoot Bikini." I said, "Oh, that's Tree Many Feathers, isn't it? I've seen this. He's not a member of the tribal council." And he went, "Yes, he is." And then he looked at the top of the letter and it didn't say anything about him being in the tribal council. And I said, "Look, before we go any further," he said, "I didn't ask you a question." And the barrister said, "Let Mr. Atack finish." So it goes on the record. I said, if you look to the June 1990 issues of the LA Times, you'll see there's an interview with Tree Many Feathers where he says he was an 8th blood member of the Bikini people, which is the legal minimum to actually claim native origin. And when he went to the tribal council, they told him there's no such thing as a blood brother, which is true. There isn't. And so he said, "I decided I'd make him a blood brother." So this is a letter from this guy, and Moxon's like, he had a ceremony. It's like, yes, he sat in his living room with 2 of his mates, and they made L. Ron Hubbard a blood brother. So the LA Times, Joel Sapel and Bob Welkos, who did those, I worked with them for 5 years on those articles. My God. And I got a free baseball cap as payment. I mean, don't work for the LA Times, people. They didn't even mention my name in the article. It was so annoying. Or the fact that I'd just got a book come out, because they felt that was kind of would make people think that they'd had an authentic source that they were talking to, and they wanted to. I don't know. I'm bitter. What can I say? I still got the baseball cap though. Very nice. And they interviewed the historian of the Bikini, who said we never made blood brothers, and they interviewed the vice chief, the deputy senior chief, who said, "No, we didn't do it." And indeed, I don't believe there's any such thing as a blood brother until Hollywood, with Tom Mix or somebody invented the idea. It's a Viking idea. It's not a Native American idea. But so you get to that, then you get Russell Miller, and Russell Miller came to me and hired me. I was the only paid researcher for his wonderful book, Barefaced Messiah, which everybody should read, just because it's got the best title of any book ever written, Barefaced Messiah. It's brilliant. I remember the day that he thought it up and he called me up and said, "I've got this title." It was like, "Oh, that is just too beautiful." Yeah. So he had a commission to write a book. He had a commission to do some articles for the Sunday Times, where he was the lead journalist, our biggest newspaper at the time, quality newspaper. And he hired me to work with him, and I couldn't get Blue Sky published. It was called Hubbard Through the Looking Glass at that time. It's still in the bibliography of his book. So I gave him a manuscript as part of the deal, and that became the basis for Barefaced Messiah. But he then went and did interviews. And one of the people he interviewed was Margaret Roberts. Now, Margaret Roberts was Ron Hubbard's aunt. She was 8 years older than him. She was the youngest of the 4 sisters. Hubbard, from the age of 6 months to the age of 12, lived at his grandfather, Lafayette Waterbury's house. He would later say in Mission into Time that his grandfather owned a quarter of Montana. That was a bit of an exaggeration. In fact, actually, that was an enormous exaggeration. He was a veterinary surgeon who had it's called a half section. I think it's 120 acres. And he had horses on that. And Hubbard said he was a cattle rancher. No, he wasn't. It's just nonsense, blather. So Margaret Roberts lived in the same house as Ron Hubbard for 11 and a half, 12 years. And when Russell Miller said, "Well, what about this thing with the Blackfoot?" She said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." So I got very interested in this because there's something about Hubbard that you could generally find that he didn't have much of an imagination. This seems an odd thing to say about somebody who wrote so many pulp stories.
Yeah.
But he would get an idea and then he'd exaggerate it as much as possible. And so the story of the Blackfoot, his first novel, Buckskin Brigades, published in 1934. If you go to the first edition, he explains that he knows about the Blackfoot because he's met somebody who knew them. So the blood brother thing kind of just grew later on. But I call it idle curiosity. I got a copy of the Encyclopedia Britannica of the year that he used. And he misdates it, but he frequently refers to 1910, and I think it was actually 1911. I walked into a shop one day, second-hand bookshop, and there was all 38 volumes for £5, which is about $7. So when I needed to check something with Hubbard, this was a great place to go. And I thought, Blackfoot, let's see if we can find out something. And this wonderful book has a map of the reservations. And I realized that when he was 6 months old, he was born in Kalispell, and he went on a train journey with his mother that passed through a Blackfoot reservation. And this was 1911. And at this point, these poor people are at their lowest ebb. They've been destroyed by the white culture.
Yeah.
And so on the railway station, there would be Blackfoot begging for money to buy alcohol. That's the story he was told by his mother that became, my father tried to come and get me, and they threatened him, and we were doing a war dance. And you're 2 years old. You're a full blood brave. That's what blood brother would mean, hatchet and all. And your father was, oh dear. So they're just fanciful stories. And as he said, the road to truth must be trod with true steps. Honesty is sanity. Therefore, by his own criteria, Elon Hubbard was not sane. And
oh yeah, I think we can agree on.
We certainly got plenty of that. So he has this patchwork of stories. He studied with gurus. In the Radisha interview, he talks about studying in Mongolia. He says that he spent most of his teens in Asia. And you're going, well, 4 weeks of his teens he spent in Asia on 2 package holidays to China. And the curiosity is that we actually have his diaries from this period. And this is an amazing thought. I got these things out of the Armstrong case. The case was in '84. And there was a lot of argument about whether the document should be made public or not. And I was over there, I think it was probably in '86 when I was over in LA. And a package was couriered to me of all of the documents that were under seal.
Wow.
And what had happened was they'd actually flooded the courthouse because they'd failed to there were 3 days when the seal was lifted. So they'd flooded the courthouse so that nobody could get to the photocopier. So they were absolutely convinced. And this came up during the Russell Miller case in London, where I was an expert witness. And they were confident that nobody could have got these documents. And you're going, you do know that Michael Flynn, the lawyer, had copies of them all and a photocopier. And during those 3 days, so I got copies, and it was a couple of years ago, I realized that I don't think anybody else has these diaries. And there are hundreds of pages in Elron Hubbard's handwriting, aged 15, 16, about his journeys. And a few pages of them have leaked out. I've put a few of them out. So he is studying with gurus in the East. This is really important. The mystic wisdom of the East has been imbibed by this nuclear physicist and the youngest Eagle Scout ever, who was a blood brother of the Blackfoot Bhikkhuni and so on. And you kind of dig into this. He claimed to have studied in India. The first time he went to India was 1952, and that was to change planes at Calcutta. That's it. I mean, maybe there was a little kiosk with a guru in it, and you could get a little bit of guru wisdom. He studied in India, in China, in Mongolia. I didn't even know they'd got any gurus there, but maybe, in their yurts with their yaks, they've got something. And Tibet. And he'd never visited Tibet. He never visited Mongolia. And in China, he went on 2 holidays. And there is just one statement in these diaries, which are a complete daily record of his time there, where he says they visited a lamasery, a monastery, and that the monks had voices like bullfrogs. And that is a condensation of all of the wisdom of the East. The monks had voices like bullfrogs.
Wow. It is so amazing to hear this now, especially as a former Scientologist, after all of the things. And even though I've known that much of it is not true, to understand the actual truth of what happened in that moment and compare that to what L. Ron Hubbard made up. I'm going to grab a question here so we don't get too far behind on these. Eric has a question. Did you think LRH ever believed in the tech taught on the bridge, or was it a con the whole time? And then what about David Miscavage? Does he believe in the tech?
The idea of the tech was twofold. The first was to cure himself, that he suffered from a significant amount of maladies. He was ill all of his life. He talks, for example, in the 1950s about terror stomach, having a distressed intestines. Now, he was actually treated for a year for ulcers. That was his war wound in 1944-45 in Oaknall Hospital. We have the records of that. I've got his Navy records, his Veteran Administration records, and you can tie them in with things he said. That was a lot of my quest, was to say, how can I check this? And I needed to find witnesses. I needed to find. So he was desperately trying to cure himself, and the method he was using was hypnotism, which he records. There are various statements. If you look in Dianetics, Evolution of a Science, Modern Science of Mental Health, he talks about this. But we didn't notice it because it wasn't the bit we were interested in. So from the age of 16, he'd learned hypnotic methods. He started using self-hypnosis. And I think that
self-hypnosis.
Yeah. So you have the affirmations, and
that's right, his affirmations.
It's a method. It's had various names over the years. Napoleon Hill was famous for it. Emile Coué-ism, Robert Pellmanism. There are lots of these things where you kind of look in the mirror and tell yourself how gorgeous you are, or whatever. And so when you look at the affirmations, I have perfect and lovely feet. Well, sorry, you have perfect and lovely feet is the line. Men are your slaves. Elemental spirits are your slaves. There's also one in there where he says that you'll do the Veterans Administration interview and you'll be well again as soon as you leave the room. So he claimed a pension his whole life. He says he cured himself, but he was claiming a Veterans Administration pension until the day he died. It wasn't very much because he wasn't considered to be badly hurt. But so did he believe in it? I think it depended what day of the week it was. But I think underneath that, he also knew that these were ways of controlling people. We kicked off last week with his statement, we have ways here of making slaves, in the Philadelphia doctorate course in December 1952. So, and he tried to sell his methods to JFK for the space program. And he said, you can buy my conditioning. That's what he called Scientology, conditioning, another word for brainwashing. So I think there's a mixture. And also he'd do something and he'd feel better, he'd get high. It's the whole basis of auditing very good indicators, euphoria, which I'm sorry to say is a state that hypnotism induces in people. That we get, oh wow, that's fantastic. We get hypomanic, that's the technical term for it. We get a little bit too happy. So he would get into that state using these procedures, believe he'd cured everything. I mean, in Dianetics, Modern Science of Mental Health, he's making these outrageous claims about, you'll never be sick again, you'll never catch a cold again. And then it's rather like,
you won't need glasses. You won't need glasses.
Yeah, exactly. And Helen O'Brien, who ran the Philadelphia doctorate courses and the Hubbard Association of Scientology, said, we put this goldfish bowl on the counter for people to throw their glasses into. Nobody ever did. So I think, and again, you're mentioning doubling and this idea of the two personalities or the two ends of somebody's personality that will justify something. He knew he was conning people. He wanted it to work. Every 6 months, he would abandon the old techniques and now the new ones. So Dianetics cured everything. And then that comes out in May 50. In June 51, in Science of Survival, he absolutely directly cancels that technique and says it's hypnotic. You're going, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So now here's the new technique. And this keeps on going into the early 60s, where he keeps canceling everything he's done every 6 months or so. No, now we've got it. It's the rock technique, or it's the black and white processing, or it's whatever. And then he gets this brilliant idea in about 62, 63, and he says, let's bring it all back. Let's every piece of this technology that has failed, let's put it in a bridge. Let's put it in a sequence. So I think he was of two minds, you might say, and he. Let's get into the origins of Scientology. It happened on a day in February 1938. Yeah. And Elon Hubbard is having his wisdom teeth pulled out. And he's on nitrous oxide, which is notorious for the hallucinations it causes. There used to be nitrous oxide clubs in the 19th century. Rajneesh.
I got ripped off at my dentist. I didn't have any hallucinations.
Oh, I am sorry to hear that. Have you thought of suing him?
I just might. I tried to tell them, look, I weigh more than I look, so you really got to give me a lot of it. They were buying it, but it did help with my anxiety over the dental procedure. So there was
okay. Well, that's great. So we're recommending that to all of our listeners. Get some. No, we're not. We're really not. It's a weird and dangerous drug. So he's had this thing, and he would later say that he was dead for 8 minutes, and he left his body, and he saw a smorgasbord. Why the word buffet wasn't good enough for him, I don't know, but he saw a smorgasbord of knowledge, and then a voice said, "It's too early," and he came back into his body. He was trying to get that out of the body experience. All of Scientology was that, and there is no single instance of him achieving it. He sold it to people. It was the goal of Scientology, to be theta clear, to be out of your body all of the time. I don't know why you'd want that, but be 3 feet back of your head, all of that stuff. He sold it.
That's true. Yeah.
And he wanted to achieve it. And I think there were days when he believed it could be achieved. And then there were days where he was just counting the money. You know, most people don't know that when he died, his walls were lined with attaché cases with $100,000 per case, and they were stacked up the wall just in case he had to go on the run again quickly.
Wow. Do you think the second part of Eric's question was, do you think
David Miscavage
believes?
No. No, I don't. I think that David Miscavage has long understood this is not simply a money-making scam, because Miscavige is now worth a couple of $1 billion.
Personally?
Well, if he who controls the bank accounts,
true.
He has a living trust in the Netherlands Antilles, or he did have. I don't know how much is in it.
That for him personally.
Yep, and he has control over the Buildings Investment Committee, BIC, which owns all of the buildings, pretty much all of the buildings. He has a controlling interest in every Scientology organization, and there are hundreds of them. And he has signed undated resignations from all of the other directors. So if he wants to get rid of you, he just writes a date on a piece of paper and you're gone. So he has control of the whole Scientology empire. I think that what's happened with, there was a kind of petty sadism in Hubbard, which developed after he started the organization. And we talked about throwing people into human sewage in Corfu Harbor in 1968 last week, and taking pictures of it. You know, it was Elon Hubbard, Auditor 41. It was published. So Hubbard had got this. It gave him a buzz to control people, to bully people, to scream at them. The severe reality adjustment that was his greatest technological invention, probably. I think Miscavige, is not very clever. He's uneducated. He left school at 13. He was brought up in Scientology by a lovely man. I interviewed Ron Miscavige along the way, and I just thought he was great. But so he's brought up by nice people. I bet his brother Ronnie years ago, and I liked him too. But David's, I think the asthma, that he's severely asthmatic. Of course, Hubbard was asthmatic too, even though Dianetics cures asthma. They both had it. He had a lot of steroids as a young man to keep him going. That can severely influence the way your brain grows, the way your body grows. It's not good for you. And that kind of treatment wouldn't be done anymore. So I think that he's kind of the product of his environment, but I think the sadism, talking with Jesse Prince or Mike Rinder, the violent attacks on people. So Miscavage, and as far as I understand, he hasn't progressed beyond OT3. I've been told that he's had enough, just like John Travolta. He did his last Scientology in about 1982, So I don't think that Miscavige believes in it. I think I said last week that Ron Hubbard's son, L. Ron Hubbard Jr., who for 7 years was, helping his father run the thing, he said Scientology works, but not as L. Ron Hubbard says it works, but as L. Ron Hubbard intends it to work. It is a system of psychological and physical slavery, and it's Brave New World. But I think of it this way, that if you're a public Scientologist, you're in Brave New World, where you're taking the Soma and everything's great and all of that. Whereas if you're a Sea Org member, you're in 1984. You're in the dark form of it. My friend Robert Vaughan Young, he announced Hubbard's death. He was the top PR in Scientology for 20 years. He read 1984 after he left, and he went, "This is where we lived. This place where things are dropped down the memory hole, and that person, their photograph is now scrubbed out. They don't exist anymore."
Yeah, they changed the history. Adam has an interesting question kind of to what you're answering here. In light of John's contention that Miscavige doesn't believe, what does he make of the copper wires Dave had installed to release charge?
I don't know anything about this.
Yeah, Adam, you'll have to, that sounds vaguely familiar to me as a story, but I don't have the details on it. So we'll put a pin in that for now and see if we can.
Let's, and I think it's good to say that he was brought up within Scientology, something you understand yourself. So you don't have another frame of reference to the world and how it works. Yeah. And so I think in those terms, he believes that Hubbard's teachings are true, but I don't think he believes that there are any operating thetans or anything like that. And he's used it, he's megalomaniac. He's used it to, when you read descriptions of the whole, the worst I've seen was Mike Rinder's Billion Years. And I'm going, 8 years, putting 100 and something people, 140 people or something in a double trailer with 2 toilets, no showers, having them crawl around on their hands and knees. I mean, Mike had housemaid's knee. It had screwed his knees up, all of this sadistic punishment. So it's difficult to know. Did he believe in Scientology as how the universe works? Yes. Did he believe that Scientology would liberate anybody? I don't think he wants to liberate anybody.
Yeah, and that really makes sense to me as well, because if you really believed in Scientology that it worked, that it did what the claims were, that it created more sanity, then why wouldn't that be that way? I mean, that really, it's so blatantly obvious when it's put into that context. Power Lies to Paralyze is asking, could Jon explain the OT3 phenobarbital connection?
I'm proud of this. This is something that I put into the public record some years ago. It was a weird happenstance. After I left Scientology, so I left in October '83, and I was at the middle of the independent movement, very center of it. And I had to get over that point where you can tell somebody what's on OT3. I'd stopped believing, but I was still kind of, this might hurt somebody. And a perfect opportunity arose. A friend of mine who had done OT2 asked me, should I buy Advanced Ability 3, as the independents were calling it, or should I buy a Ducati motorbike? And I said, buy the bike, but here's an OT3 pack. Decide for yourself. So there was no risk. He was in the non-interference area. He'd done OT2, and he went off. And that weekend, Jerry Armstrong came to the UK to testify in the what's called the Leahy case in Ray Ward's B&G, two kids whose Scientologist father had kept them, and the mum wanted them back now. And so I met Jerry for the first time then. This would be end of June 1984. And Jerry said Hubbard was on drugs when he did OT3, which I later verified with Virginia Downsborough, who's rescued him from the hotel where all the drugs were. So she was still selling OT3, so she still believed in it, but she knew that he was out of his head on drugs. And Jerry Armstrong mentioned phenobarbital, which is a barbiturate drug, a sedative, something that zones you out. And so I go and see my friend. He delivers the pack back the same day. I've just seen Jerry, and my friend Alex gives me the pack, and he says, "Oh, this is nonsense." I said, "Yeah," and I said, "Jerry says he was on drugs when he did it," and Alex said, "Phenobarbital." And I double take. I didn't tell you that. I said drugs. There are lots of drugs in the world. How did you know it was phenobarbital? He said, "Oh, well, as a young man, I joined the Navy to travel the world and take every drug I could get my hands on. And I took phenobarbital, and you have this sense that you take a big dose of it, you're being blown into hundreds of little beings. You're divided, and it's explosive." So there was what Hubbard experienced. He took huge, I think the expression is shitloads of phenobarbital. Now, then you trace this back further. Looking in his Veterans Administration records, he was on prescription for phenobarbital because he was supposed to have an ulcer. They never actually found the ulcer on X-ray, but it was a standard treatment then for ulcers, because ulcers were believed to be caused by anxiety or stress. Of course, we now know 95% of ulcers are caused by Helicobacter pylori. It's a disease. It's not because you're stressed out. You get stressed out because your stomach lining's been eaten. But it was thought then you had to relax the person, de-stress them. So they give them these huge hits of phenobarbital. And then I found a lecture, just by happenstance and luck, in I think it's 1952. It's referenced in my paper, Never Believe a Hypnotist, which I pray that everybody watching will read. It's on my website, because it tells you more about Hubbard than anything else I've seen. Quotations from Hubbard about hypnotism, really fascinating. But it has in there, he says, "I made myself a guinea pig on one of these experiments, and it's pretty hard," something like that, "to come off phenobarbital." So he admits to having been addicted to phenobarbital. In 1963, I think it was, he tried to cash a prescription for the UK version, which is called Nembutal, at a pharmacy in East Grinstead, signed Dr. L. Ron Hubbard, and they refused to give it to him.
Oh my gosh. So while he was actively auditing on this, operating Thetan level 3, where we find out that there's Xenu, the galactic overlord, and blowing up people in volcanoes, and all of these body Thetans, these entities are now attached to us as humans. He was doing high doses of phenobarbital, which causes a feeling where you just break into all these pieces.
Fragmentation, disintegration.
Oh my God. You know, it's one thing to know he made it up and that we spent ridiculous amounts of money and time in auditing out these imaginary entities. But to hear that he was like literally doing drugs that would cause that while doing it just really makes it so much worse.
Yeah. And Virginia Downsborough, I interviewed her twice, in 86 and in 88. I think it was in LA, it was in California somewhere. And she was still running a center. She was the first person to be asked to join the Sea Project, which became the Sea Org. And she said no, because she'd been summoned to Gran Canaria to rescue him. And she said, "I arrived there and he was out of his mind. He hadn't eaten or had anything to drink for days. And he was living off a shelf load of drugs." And she indicated about a 2-foot shelf. And both times I said, "Please tell me what they were," and she would not tell me. And the last time I talked with David Mayo in 2013, he contacted me. I'd been away for 17 years, not having anything to do with this awful subject. And when he heard that I was talking again, he got hold of me and we talked for a couple of hours. And he said, yeah, Virginia had told him what they were. And he didn't tell me either. We know that, we're pretty sure that Demerol, which is an opioid, was on the shelf. He often talked about amphetamines. If you have to grab hold of anything, grab hold of Benzedrine. It was normal in 50-51 because they were legal drugs. You get them, appetite. There was a way of slimming, perfectly safe. So he recommended amphetamines, and his son Nib said that when they did the research, the cold-blooded and factual account of your last 60, 73 or 76 trillion years, depending which part of the book you look at, that was 2 weeks of research done with amphetamines. And he gave his 18-year-old son, who turned up having not seen him for 10 years and never having had the child maintenance paid. His son desperately wants to know him, and the first thing that happens, he gets a handful of amphetamines and told to lie on a couch and say, "What do you see? Are you a clam now?" Or whatever. So,
oh my gosh, it's just so insidious. Adam's giving us a little more context. Hold on, I thought he saw something. Oh, here we go.
Copper wires.
So he says that Mike Rinder reported that Miscavage had copper wires installed outside his office so he could hold on to them and release charge at any time.
So he was a lunatic. What can we say? What a ridiculous idea. So he was earthing himself to release charge. It seems like this interesting crossover that when Freud talked about emotional charge, and Hubbard, of course, picked up the idea from there, along with the whole original Dianetic procedure, that this becomes electrical charge. And there's this confusion that, are we talking about emotional charge or are we talking about electrical charge? Or are they the same thing? Probably not. Let me say one other thing about OT3. And a friend of mine called Peter Ford, many years ago, wrote a paper which you can find on the web, where he deconstructed OT3 scientifically, scientific study of OT3 or something like that it's called. And one of the things he points out is that the volcanoes are meant to be in the Canary Islands and your home, Hawaii, your place of naissance. And neither of these places existed 75 million years ago. They're geologically both date to about 9 million. So, and why are you dropping people in volcanoes and blowing them up and collecting them on electric? That's a little bit harsh, isn't it? That's certainly overkill,
Yeah, the dates never really fully matched up. I do remember this when I was in the course room doing OT3 in LA at the Blue Buildings. I remember there was a pack or a box. It was something where it was like added data that wasn't from Elon Hubbert, but that might explain the numbers not matching up. Like it was things about dinosaurs and things that have been found out since, and them just trying to prove that it was true.
Yeah, exactly that. Hubbard read articles before doing OT3 about the Great Extinction. And there have been a series of great extinctions on this planet where the majority of species died out. And this is the meteorite that hit in what is now going to be called the Gulf of America, but has traditionally been called the Gulf of Mexico. And this hit with such violence that it caused probably the skies to be black for quite some time, and cold-blooded animals like dinosaurs started dying out. Now, originally, as best I can tell, and I'm not going to go digging through newspaper archives for this because I don't care, but originally 75 million years was the estimate of when this had happened. Now let's think about date locate. If you get your date wrong, and 75 million is pretty imprecise, isn't it? You'd think we'd have some thousands and down to the second, but never mind. 75 million years ago, then there was a revision, and I think it's now placed at 63 million. And,
really? I did not know there was a revision.
So they're running the wrong date.
Yeah, to get it to line up more. Oh my gosh, it makes sense that they would try to do that. Fuzzy Pink Handcuffs wants to know, do you consider yourself cured of Scientology? And if so, what do you attribute your cure to?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's a metaphor, isn't it? Is it an illness? Is it a virus? Is it am I healed? And yeah, I used to have this thing where if I was giving a public talk, I used to say I'm a recovering Scientologist, on like with an alcoholic that you're recovering, and it's not true. I'm way past it. And some little mannerisms, people will often, for example, have some part of the language I was visiting Boston in 1991 and staying with my friend Steve Hassan, and we were getting ready to go out, and I said, "Let's blow," and he said, "Oh, that's a Scientology word." And I said, "No, I mean let's leave. That's his slang meaning. I don't mean I've committed overts and I've got to leave your apartment." So it can, but if at the Toronto conference I did in 2015, which again I really highly recommend. We had 27 people there talking, like Paulette Cooper was there, Tony Ortega was there. Nan McLean turned up, who's just one of my heroes, and her son John McLean, who gave an amazing talk. Just incredible things that people said. What was I talking about?
Are you cured from Scientology?
Was I cured from Scientology? And there you're sort of going, Hannah Whitfield was there, who's a dear, dear, sweet person. And she used the word terminal. She was talking about somebody and she said, this terminal. And you're going, it's now what, 35 years or something since she left Scientology. And there's still something in there. Yeah. So what I say to people is, if you find yourself using a word, if you catch yourself thinking a concept, Cyril Vosper, the author of The Mindbenders, it was great, good fun. I loved Cyril when I got to know him. Really funny guy, really witty guy. But he said when I first met him that he would find himself 14 years after leaving Scientology crossing the street and saying, "Have I committed an overt?" And so when it comes up, you examine it, you think about it. I think, undone everything because I've been through. I know how all of the procedures work. We did one video at Toronto about that with Steve Hassan, with Chris Shelton. So I think it was Chris's third public appearance. Oh, he was just a little boy. And with the brilliant Christian Sturko, who's one of my closest friends. And we deconstructed training routines. Steve Hassan, when he first saw these, and he's a leading expert on both cults and hypnotism, said it was the most overt use of hypnotism he had ever seen in any cult. And we're talking about hundreds of cults. Training routine 0 is a way of getting you zoned out. And then, so you have all of these techniques that are taking you to this place. We also did the book on
I just want to explain to people what that is so they can have the visual. That's when you're seated across from a person, hands in your laps, eyes open, looking, being there comfortably and confronting the person without flinching, moving. A fly lands on you, you just got to let it happen and hope it goes fast, that fly gets what it wants and leaves. But you can't swat it, nothing. You cannot move.
Yeah, and it's worth saying that in the bulletin, it says you have to do this for some hours. This isn't just a few minutes. And you do it until you have a major stable win. I talked with a woman who'd been in Scientology 15 years. And this was, it was a week that I was coming out. And I'd been given this list of people. I'd never met this wonderful woman. And I sat with her. And she'd been in Scientology 15 years. And I'm telling her these things. And she's got a very wooden expression. I'm kind of going, this is really not getting through. Yeah. She's going to throw me out, And then she looked at me and she said, "Does that mean I don't have to do it anymore?" I went, "Yeah." And she went, "Oh, thank God for that." She'd been on the communication course for 15 years because where it says, do this until you have a major stable win, being more rational than the rest of us, she was like, how do I know it's stable? How can I possibly know that it's stable? So you have to tell that lie to get off the course.
Exactly. You learn, I think the biggest skill, if you really want to survive in Scientology, is you learn to be fairly articulate about sharing a win or something big that happened so that you can not have to do it anymore.
Yeah. It's always getting, the next level will work. So I'll get through this one as fast as possible now I've paid for it. It's like buying something from Amazon and by the time it arrives, you don't want it. You want the next thing, you want the dopamine buzz,
Exactly. YT Watcher has a question. How did Scientology get involved with so many attorneys? This seems to be unique compared to other cults. The attorneys help them navigate the legal system.
The involvement with attorneys grew during the 1960s to the point where I think it's safe to say that Scientology is the most litigious organization in the history of planet Earth.
True.
There was a single day when they were going up against the Internal Revenue Service. They had sued everybody they could find, They had 3,000 cases, and they dropped them all in a single day. It seems to have started when Hubbard was based in St. Hill in England.
Mm-hmm.
That, you know, he'd have this never defend, always attack that would come up. And back in 55, we mentioned this last time, the Scientologist, a manual on the dissemination of material. He talks about stopping people from practicing Scientology without his permission, practicing Scientology without a license. And he says to ruin these people, if possible, ruin these people utterly. But he says the law can be used very easily to harass. And enough harassment on somebody who's on the thin edge is usually enough. If possible, ruin them utterly. So that's the first mention I can think of in 55. And it builds so that with the creation of the Guardian's Office in March 66, he creates a legal department which will be headed by Charles Parcell, and later by Rory Balding at the very end of its. Both of whom I met along the way. Rory, I met Charles Parcell briefly, and he misquoted T.S. Eliot. And let me tell you, don't do that to me. It's just so awkward. What do you say to somebody when they're misquoting poetry at you? It's like, you can't, it's just rude to say you're misquoting T.S. Eliot. How dare you? Outside. Rapiers or pistols, you know. But he seemed like a nice enough guy. But Rory took over, and Rory was great. I spent time with Rory Balding, and he was really smart. And their policy was, we will silence everybody who comes against us. I think Miscavage was, and I've been on the receiving end of quite a lot of these cases. I was sued in New York. I can't remember how many times I was sued here, and it just became impossible. I was 7 days a week with 3 law firms trying to defend myself. It was impossible. They poured money into it. I think the Times suit is said they spent $20 million on.
Trying to sue you to get you to stop talking about Scientology.
With me personally, I was told that £2 million was spent by 1993. I talked out the head of OSA Invest, and she told me everything. It was great. Bless her. Lovely woman. Just, you're up to some nasty stuff. But so the idea is basically to harass people using the law. And they poured out thousands of cases, and it usually worked. Miscavige decided they were spending too much money on it. And in 2011, when they lost the Times suit, for 20 years, there was not a book about Scientology. Now there's about one every other day. 20 years, nothing in English. My book was the last in 1990. And the next one is Janet Reitman, who's published an article in Rolling Stone and found that they're not suing anymore. And publishers were telling me, we can't publish your book because we won't make any money on it. It'll all be lost in litigation. So that's the ethos behind it. There was a peak point in the early 90s where they had 15 US law firms working for them.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot.
It's more than you need, really.
Yeah. YT Watchers asking, through research and interviews, have you noticed different flavors of Scientology in different countries? Any unique features of Scientology in one location versus another? Well, that's an interesting question.
Isn't it? I can't say that I have.
Well, I mean, one of the big core tenets and beliefs in Scientology is that it's applied correctly 100% of the time. You don't apply it differently, in the South as you do in the North, that it is the same and it's consistent. That was the whole reason given behind the golden age of tech, which coming up with those drills where you got the binder and you just read questions to each other over and over and over and over again was part of that. So my leaning is to say no, because that was the whole point, is it needed to be standard and the same. I will say it was to the point where there might have been cultural differences in other places that would have made some of the way Scientology works rude, and it didn't stop them. It was still Scientology's always applied that way.
Yeah, the standard technology. And there are places where it never took. So there's no Japanese Scientology.
Well, there's an org now.
Yeah, they keep starting an org there, but they don't get anywhere. So there are 200,000 Moonies in Japan and 25 Scientologists. It just doesn't seem to fit. And in the UK, it's never really done very well. In the 2021 census, there were 1,100 people in the whole of the UK and Northern Ireland.
Oh.
Northern Ireland, Scotland. Only 1,100 people said they were Scientologists, where there were still, I think, 200,000 Jedi.
Yeah, that's right.
One Sith,
I heard
which is
about
me.
that.
Yeah, all the lies they tell about the Sith, it's terrible.
Scooter Mom wants to know, will you ever put your book on Audible?
I set about trying to do that this year, and Opening Our Minds is on Audible and should be helpful in deconstructing, because I use Scientology to exemplify authoritarian control in there, so you see what he's up to. I've also done Scientology Cult of Greed as an audiobook, but I love reading out loud, but it's 420 pages, and doing L. Ron Hubbard's accent that much. So
I bet these days you could get like AI to read your book or something there. I mean, if you can use AI to translate a book in Audible into another language, I would think you'd be able to. They can even mimic your voice now. You just have to record your voice for like 10 minutes and it can mimic your voice. So it could be done, John. It could be done.
Yeah, and it can write my next 10 books. What I'd like AI to do is to sell some books for me, because I need the money, folks. I would like to do it, but I started off with the thought of, this coming year, I need to put something else out there. Aaron asked me 2 years ago when we recorded together. He said, can you do it? Because he doesn't like reading.
Yeah.
So lazy. So, well, why don't you bloody read it out? So I started, I was setting up to do that. And then the idea of a new book came into my head. And I've been working on that since August, which is called If Scientology Ruled the World.
Oh, when do you think that'll be out?
I don't know. I thought it would take me 3 weeks. So I had to stop somewhere around Christmas, because the rabbit hole, the connections between Crowleyite magic, which is the basis of Scientology. It really is. I've proved that. I wrote a paper 30 years ago called Possible Origins for Dianetics and Scientology, which I think is one of my brilliant, snappy titles. And it's free on the web somewhere or other. And showed that, in fact, about half the things that I found, and I in all detail, I think 120 things, I don't know if they all went in there, 60 of them came straight from Crowley. But then you find out that Crowley is a stream that comes out of the same origins as the Nazi Party, which was formed in the Tool Group. And so you go, no, don't make me read another book. So it's just been one book after another. I've got, the chapters have separated out. The book started, in fact, as a book about, absurd beliefs can lead to atrocious behaviors. And that I wrote a proposal for that, which Steve Hassan and I were going to do it together. And then Steve Hassan's agent didn't bother to read it, having, told me to do this. He didn't even bother to read it. So I went, I'm not going to do it then. If I can't sell it, I'm not going to do it. Went off, came back to it last August, and it's kind of like OT3 and phenobarbital. It's fragmented, so that I now have a book on. I got far too much about the Nazis to put in this book, so I'm like, well, that's got to be a separate book. I started writing my own autobiography within it, because although the first 4 chapters of Blue Sky are about my time, they're a quick tour. There's sort of nobody's really analysed the techniques here and what they're actually doing. And because the bridge, I left 41 years ago, the space age religion, leading age technology of Scientology, nothing's changed in that time, because it's now, you know, in the decay part of the cycle of action. It's not a cycle, by the way. He misunderstood the word cycle. A cycle is something that repeats. It's a sequence of action, Ron. He's committed an overt against us with his misunderstood words. So if Scientology ruled the world is one book. There'll be the Myth of the Master Race. There'll be a second. There'll be my autobiography, which is an analysis of the techniques and what's actually going on, what you're actually being got to do here, and a book on the revelation, which was part of where it all started, because of course Scientology starts with Hubbard trying to bring the Antichrist to life, trying to create Armageddon. That's his fundamental belief. It's also Charles Manson's fundamental belief. It's also how Waco happened. It's also how the State of Israel was created. It's also how the 2 Iraq wars happened, because there are people interpreting this book, and rather than saying, as it clearly says, and I'm not a Christian, I'm agnostic, but the book very clearly says this is about the persecution of Christians in 64 AD by Nero. It says it's in there, but people want it to be prophecy, and they keep going, we're now in the end days, Jesus is coming. So Crowley believed he was the beast 666. Hubbard believed he was the beast 666. They weren't. They're dead. They had deluded themselves. So there's another book about that, and it goes on and on. I don't want to do any of this. I want to paint some pictures. Can I have some time off?
Yeah, you got a lot of books to write.
Yeah.
AA says John's channel is a huge factor in me finally seeing through L. Ron Hubbard, a lifesaver.
Oh, thank you so much. You've no idea how important that is, because I don't make any money. So it's only the plaudits that I have. But whenever somebody says that it's helped, I remember that it was all worthwhile. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah. Katie Porter's whiteboard says the History of Man updated version still says the Piltdown Man was real, but if you Google it, it was debunked in the 90s, but Miscavage still put it in the basics.
Yeah, well, the Piltdown Man was, I think, first debunked in the 50s, and it was a student prank. You know, it's
I don't even know what that is. What is the Piltdown Man?
Piltdown is not that far from East Grinstead, where St. Hill is. It's in Surrey, I think. And there was a professor, I think he was a learned professor, and his students had got this thing, and they'd got a human top part of the skull and an ape jaw, and they put them together and led him along to discover it. And he announced his great discovery, and it went all over the world. So yeah, it's been in the book since 1952.
Oh my gosh.
It's still there. So we're still descended from clams, the grim weeper or boohoo. And you know, I'm so embarrassed. I believed in this guy. You know?
I know a lot of it is like, oh my gosh.
It's like 4-year-old stuff, you know.
Yeah. Love Maddie says, how did Lafayette explain how he got past the implant station? Great question, Maddie.
That is a mystery. Yeah, he doesn't. And one of the things that's interested me is how evasive he was about his psychic abilities, for example. He doesn't seem to claim them. How evasive he is about his past lives. You know, he reckons he was Cecil Rhodes. We would actually say Cecil Rhodes, who we know was a child abuser. And Hubbard was saying, oh yeah, that's who I was. But we don't have much about, you know, and you'd think that given that he gave, 3,500 lectures, that he'd have said something about himself in all of these. So the implant stations is still a mystery. And how is it that all of the, you know, the amount of telescopes on Earth now, I mean, even a home telescope, there are hundreds of thousands of telescopes. Nobody's seen these things yet.
That's true. Did he specifically say, I couldn't recall this specific piece of information. I can't remember where these implant stations supposedly are. I remember one being on the moon, I think. But
and circling the Earth. He
specifically did say circling the Earth.
Oh yeah.
Easily unprovable.
Yeah, afraid so. But The other one is, and this one, it's like some things are just daft when you get to them. And so in History of Man and in various lectures in the early 50s, he talks about the fourth and fifth invader forces.
Yeah.
And if you think your hands are too big, it's because you've got a past life as a fifth invader. So that's all we know about them. They've got big hands and they live on Mars. And you kind of go, look, Neil deGrasse Tyson versus Elon Musk. Why are we going to go to Mars and terraform Mars so we can live in a big greenhouse? Because you can't live outside there because it's too cold. So the fifth invader force lived there. The fourth invader force, according to Ron Hubbard and the sacred, inviolable scripture of Scientology, they live on Venus, where the temperature, well, it can go up to 800 degrees. You know, it's even bacteria can't manage that. Sulfur-eating bacteria. So, and they made a prison planet of Earth. And again, these people are really stupid, aren't they? They're going to live on Mars and Venus, and they're going to give us the nice place. It doesn't make much sense to me.
That's true. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
No, it doesn't. And it's really boring. I mean, talking with Mike Rinder, who was a watch messenger, which meant he spent, 6-hour shifts with Hubbard. And he said, he'd just keep talking about atomic powered racing cars, and it's just he's stuck in this kind of 1940s science fiction view.
Yeah. He would talk to Mike about that, Mike Rinder, about those type of cars.
Yeah, and probably with Janice Gillum Grady, with any of the watch messengers, the messengers he allowed close to him, he'd tell them these stories. And it'd just be the same stuff. And you're kind of going, look, if we've had 76 trillion years, as he finally gets to in History of Man, or 1.25 quadrillion years, which is in the OT5 pack, if we've had this long, surely it's been a bit more interesting than a 1940s science fiction story about Ars Laicus, Halatribus, or Markab, which are the only three systems that seem to have existed in the last 1.25 quadrillion years. You're going, Rome, Babylon, Assyria, we've had much more fun on this planet than these boring people have. So I wonder how he could have believed it, and to what extent he did believe it, because when you start saying Ars Laicus, and you've just come back from England, which he had, where we have Ars Lickers, and what he tells the audience on that day is, all of you spent lives in Ars Laicus.
What is Ars Laicus?
And it's a brown noser, an arse licker.
Oh, you're saying ass licker.
Yeah, and Ars Laicus is what he's taken the American ass. Here we say arse, Ars Laicus, and he's telling the audience, you've all been there. He makes lots of puerile jokes. My favorite, which nobody else has ever come to me with this, is one of the most obvious ones, which is the word Thetan. Now, let's say that you had a lisp.
Satan.
Satan. Yeah. Body Satans. It's a joke. It's a childish joke. You're a Satan. You're a Thetan.
Do you think that L. Ron Hubbard intended it that way, that it was actually a joke?
Yeah, and there are lots of them. There are lots of places where he is having fun at how stupid we are.
Son of a bitch!
And we're paying for him to do it.
Again, like, I've been out of Scientology for 15 years. I know, so much of it that wasn't true, but to hear this and understand like how much of a con man he actually really was just continues to be an eye-opener. Adam says, men are from Mars, the fifth invader are from Venus.
Fair enough.
Cheryl says, oh my God, I heard my dad say this. Not kidding. I thought it was dementia. Her father was a Scientologist, and Cheryl never became a Scientologist, but she was raised, spent time with her father, who was a Scientologist, and that created its own problems. But that's hilarious there, Cheryl, that that he actually was saying stuff like that about the invader force. Let's see here. AA has a question. Did LRH intentionally structure Scientology to induce cognitive dissonance, causing people to feel mentally stuck and albeit or all
Unable, I think it should be.
unable to move forward?
Unless it's a reference to my late friend Jon Atack.
Mhm.
An unablet, that would be interesting. Yes, we talked the last time about double bind, not double blind, double bind theory, where the whole, Scientology is based on the two-terminal universe.
Mhm.
The idea that you have negative and positive. Now, I personally think that there's the weak gravitational force, the strong gravitational force, the electromagnetic force, and we need to understand at the moment positive and negative is Michael Faraday's sort of 1860s view of, or whatever view of the world. That's as far as Hubbard got in his science classes. So everything is two terminals, and he then sets up this whole system, the opposition terminals, which I think only OT2 has them anymore, but it used to be the release grade 6, the clearing course, the original OT1, OT2. You'd have to sit there digging a ditch, as Hubbard said. So you would, and still do on OT2, you'd have to be and not to be, and you have to feel the shock or see the light, depending which one it is. And these are the implants. The implants are term and op-term, and he's actually describing what he's doing to you. He's giving you contradictions, because the idea, as he says, is that if you've got the term and the op-term implanted, that you can't make decisions, you can't think anymore, you're paralyzed. So you have to go to an authority to tell you what to do. He is that authority. So we talked about this a little bit.
So OT2, operating Thetan level 2, because I'm remembering that there is a list, and so they're opposition terminals there. Each contradicted the other one.
Yeah,
I remember that. So that was actually with the intention to.
Well, he's saying that he believes that that's how the world works, and it's a rather simplistic view of logic and thinking, but we won't get into that. It was a way of boring people to death.
He was good at that.
But I interviewed John McMaster a couple of times, the world's first real clear, and who was an eccentric character, let's say, to put it mildly. But he said that they spent months, day after day, sitting there with this term, op-term, think of a light or a shock, and then the next one and the next one. They got no idea what they were doing or why they were doing it. And Hubbard said in lecture he gave about the clearing course, that you see when you do, if you did the clearing course, nobody does it anymore, that it's digging a ditch. It's thoroughly boring. And John said that one day Hubbard said, "You're clear." And John said, "What?"
Wow.
And Hubbard said, "No, you're clear now." And away you go. I had a phone call from a guy who's a set designer in Hollywood. This was, I don't know, 25 years ago or something. And he said he'd never understood why it was. He was one of the first 10 clears. So somebody can probably identify him from this. But he'd never understood why it was that 7 of the first 10 clears were gay. And they called themselves the queer clears.
Wait.
John McMaster, of course, being the first.
Stop.
Yeah. Whoa. Hang on there, John.
I mean, I'd heard that John, the first clear, was gay. I did not know the first 7 were gay, and they called themselves
7 of the first 10.
And they called themselves the queer clears. So they identified as gay. They were openly gay.
Yeah.
So how'd that happen?
To each other.
Only to each other, not L. Ron
Well,
Hubbard.
Hubbard will have known because they've had their auditing folders.
Yeah.
So, it's a point where homosexuality has just become legal, finally, in the United Kingdom. But it's still, I mean, to this day, it's pretty hard on gay people. But back then, and he was saying to me, "Well, why do you think this was?" And it's like, think about it. It's blackmailable. That's why it was. Hubbard wanted to put you people there, and he found people who liked John McMaster. John was an incredible public speaker, and Hubbard used to get really upset because McMaster would get a lot more applause than he did. And, you know, I was told that towards the end of his life, as the dementia took over, there was only one statistic that Hubbard was really interested in, though Jesse Prince said he still looked at all of the stats for all of the orgs every week. But the one he really liked was how many minutes do people clap my picture at the end of an event?
Oh, hell no. Oh my gosh. I'm just still so. How did this happen, though, to have 7 of the first clears be gay when Elon Hubbard was so homophobic and it was part of the time? But the things that he said about them being in covert hostility and criminals and all of that, you can't make case gain. You can't get up the bridge if you're committing present time sins or overt. So how did that happen?
Well, the first thing that you have to know,
one, I just want to say for the record, I think it's absolutely fabulous. What an FU to Elron Hubbard and his legacy. But how did it happen? I'm so shocked. I feel like, oh my God, the gays had already infiltrated Scientology and was turning it on its head. But somehow Elron Hubbard still was coming out with all of this. You can't trust people who are homosexuals. All this stuff.
Yeah. And so let's clarify the first thing. Ron Hubbard was bisexual.
That's right. You told us that last time. I'm still processing that because he was so the rules, especially in the Sea organization, no premarital sex. You got to be like super vanilla and boring. And
can I give you an Elron Hubbard quotation on that point?
Yeah.
The overt doth speak loud in accusation. The criminal accuses others of things he himself is doing. I used to keep a picture of him that had been printed in the Auditor with that underneath it. And I went, yeah, that's right. The criminal accuses others of things he himself is doing. It's like his drug taking, you know, that he took LSD and he admitted to people around him. David Mayo, who said, you know, it wasn't in a session. He told me in conversation he'd taken LSD. I had a letter from somebody whose guru had taken LSD with Elron Hubbard. And you're going, but he's saying you're stupid and you're useless if you take LSD. It's like, yeah, that's not what happened. I'll tell you that story if you like, how the LSD years after they have come off of LSD, I think is the title of the bulletin in about 78 or something. And it says, on research into 2 cases I have found. Now, as somebody who does have some vague idea of how science is done, I'm going, 2 cases? You know, gold standard study is 1,000 cases. And it worried me progressively that Hubbard had never done any kind of study at all.
Yeah.
So on research into 2 cases, and I was interviewing Harvey Haber, who was Hubbard's literary agent for a while. He was in the Sea Org. He told me a number of fascinating stories, very interesting man. And he said that, sorry, I've lost my thread. I looked over here and something else happened.
Hubbard was a bisexual who took LSD.
Took LSD. It's the LSD. You know, we're saying horrible things here. So I mentioned this bulletin. And he said I was one of the 2 cases. And I went, oh. And he said, and what had happened was that I pissed him off. This was working on the tech films at La Quinta in 1977. I'd pissed him off. And this woman had pissed him off. And he had our folders gone through to find out what we had in common. And we'd both taken LSD. And that was it. That was the research. And it was a way of telling them how much he hated them for annoying him, issuing this bulletin. I think there may have been something else underneath it, which is one of the other things I've been working on for a couple of years is Charles Manson and his close association with Scientology. And a number of people have said, oh, he used LSD to condition the family, his followers. And I'm kind of going, that doesn't make sense to me. MK Ultra, the CIA program, where they did tens of thousands of LSD experiments on people. The reason that they decided that LSD wasn't useful to them is you can't use it to condition people. You can't use it to fix ideas because it unfixes ideas, which is not necessarily a good thing, not necessarily a bad thing. But I think Hubbard understood that if people took LSD, they might have a shift of perspective. about what he was teaching, and they might not believe anymore.
That makes so much sense. I've wondered too, even like with some, I mean, it just makes so much sense. It really does. Did other people back then know that the first seven clears were gay? I'm sorry, I just can't let this go.
You're absolutely obsessed with this, Natalie.
I'm like the irony.
Yeah, no, I
mean,
mean,
this
people.
has been totally covered up in Scientology history. That's
Yeah,
never what Scientologists are told.
No, and I think quite a lot of people worked out, as you say, that John McMaster was gay and always travelled with his secretary Colin around the world. And when I interviewed John, it was weird because, you know, this is 1984, so there's still quite a lot of people around who'd seen him and absolutely revered him. He was the exemplar. He was clear. He was OT. He was all of these wonderful things. And it was very difficult. I decided he was still alive, so I didn't want to publicly say who he was and the man I'd met. But the man I met was an alcoholic. He drank a bottle of vodka a day. I never saw him take a morsel of food, which was weird.
Who is this?
John McMaster, the world's first real clear, as appointed by Ron Hubbard. And when I went back to interview, I did a 3-hour interview, and then I went back to interview him again. And he said, I'd like to make a recording, because that's how he spoke. I'd like to make a recording for myself of this conversation. And he pressed the play button instead of the record button. And there he was saying, I came with love for you and you. He actually had he'd rehearsed over the years. He'd rehearsed this speech, which he gave me in our first interview. And there it was again. So when I said to him, John, my first question, I've still got the recording somewhere. I must put it up somewhere sometime. I said to him, John, how did you get into Scientology? He said, I was born in Durban. And he's got this whole prepared speech. But when I said to him, I went home after interviewing him and I wrote to him and I said, remember letters? We used to have those things back before computers took the world over. I wrote to him and I said, John, it's okay to be gay. And you can actually find that there's an independent Scientology group in Los Angeles called the Gay Theta Association. Why don't you get in touch with them? Have some chums, Scientologists who are gay. And I got this 7-page letter, indignant letter saying, how dare I say he was homosexual? And I mean, okay, fine. And I mentioned this to Otto Rose, who, of course, known him on the ship. And Otto said, Pat, to his secretary, come here. What did John say to me on the phone? Because John had called him up. And it was about doing something with his genitalia in John's mouth. So he wasn't gay. He just,
he just likes certain things.
Right, having sex with men, But
that's just so crazy to me. And what's amazing too is that it was hidden. It's still hidden to this day from Scientologists. They do not know this. That the first 7 clears were gay, that L. Ron Hubbard was bisexual. He fought so much against that, put it down at every turn, made it something Scientologists are never allowed to do. And it makes sense too, if that's something that, he was struggling with or felt that he should be struggling with it. And really sad when you think about his son, Quentin, and the circumstances of Quentin's death. And Quentin being gay.
Yeah, Quentin, I think we mentioned this as well. I've met a couple of people who knew Quentin quite well. And it is Quentin, not Quentin.
Quentin?
Yes, there's an E in there, Quentin. Quentin Hubbard. Quentin. Right, so put it in a sentence. No. And it's a good job he didn't go and live in Quantico, because that would have been very confusing. Quentin from Quantico. We didn't have trouble with that. He was 22 when he killed himself, and he was one of the few people who had done the class 12. In fact, he was one of the 50 people who had done the class 12 auditor course. He was at the top of the bridge. He was OT7 as it was then. I think he'd done the lists by then, the L's. and all of his certificates were cancelled by his father. And I was told when I was involved that he'd actually redone the whole bridge, and I repeated that, and was Dennis Ehrlich commented. This is when I came back in 2013. I did something with Steve Hassan and said he did the bridge twice, and Dennis Ehrlich said no, he didn't. I was the programming, not the case supervisor, but the guy that programs people, and it was my job, and we cancelled his certificates, and he never came back. And he just sounds like a sweet, innocent young man who was gay. And I think it said when we last spoke that there was a division within the Guardian's office called Branch 4, which nobody knows about, who carried guns, and they went to gay bars, gay clubs, and showed a picture of Quentin, put a gun in the owner's mouth, and said, if we find he's been in here, this is what's going to happen to you. So he was excluded from that life. He was excluded from the people he considered his tribe. And carbon monoxide.
Isolated that way. It's just so wrong.
Yeah, it's evil. And when Mary Sue was told about it, she broke down that her son had died. When Elon Hubbard was told about it, he said, well, that's more bad public relations he's caused for us. He was heartless. He was absolutely heartless, totally selfish.
He sounds like it. He definitely sounds like it. Northern Girl's question is, there really are no steadfast rules to any cult, are there? It seems playbook changes whenever the wind blows.
That there are variations on a theme, but I can't really get into the whole thing here. If you dig out a copy of my book, Opening Our Minds, and I say you can listen to my sonorous voice doing the ASMR version. But in Opening Our Minds, I show the basic techniques that are used throughout in gangs by terrorists, in university hazing, that you'll find the same patterns and the same. In fact, Michael Langoni, who was the head of the International Cultic Studies Association, when he read the book, the first version of it, said that nobody had ever done this before, showing that the same methods are being used, but then they're varied a little bit. And if you take a group like Transcendental Meditation, which I do regard as a dangerous cult, having studied it in some depth, and there are videos about it with Pat Ryan and Joe Kelly on my channel, who were long-term members of it, high-ranking in Pat's case. They have two techniques. You can sit and repeat the name of a demon or deity, and you're not meant to know it's a demon or deity, and go agri till you trip out, which I don't think is very good for people, but and that's not the whole of what meditation is. There are good forms of meditation, that's not one of them. Or you can do the psychic hopping, where you cross your legs, and I interviewed a woman who had fractured her coccyx by doing that, and will be in pain for her whole life as a consequence of doing the psychic, the flying, the levitation. Two techniques. Scientology currently, by my reckoning, has about 2,000 techniques. They probably boil down to about 10 different approaches. There's not that much. And where another group will focus on being religious or being commercial or being therapy, Hubbard went for everything and everyone. And so he got the spiritual seekers, people like me who were interested in mysticism. And I was a Zen Buddhist when I met Scientology at 19. And salespeople are equally attracted. The amount of con artists in Scientology, these people who just unbelievable. I met this guy. It must be safe to name him. I don't think he's around anymore. Harry Mason, and he was a geologist, and he and his partner, Malcolm McPherson, had set up a gold exploration company, and they told me they'd raised £2 million, all of which they spent on Scientology. And I said, so are you doing any gold exploration? They went, no. And Harry told me that he'd spent, I think it was $400,000 on a couple of weeks of OT5 or something at Flag, and his auditing had stopped when he had a heart attack.
Oh my gosh.
I'd ask for your money back. I really would.
Yeah, no kidding.
So this, scamming people. And then, there was another guy called Jamie Dodwell in East Grinstead. And my wife worked for him for a few weeks. And he was selling this cladding that you spray on the outside of houses. And it was guaranteed for life. And the next year it started falling off. Mm-hmm. And I was told that he went to the ethics section and said, going to be, and I talked to one of the guys who'd worked for him, and he said, yeah, there's this primer that you're meant to put on first. And he said, oh no, we don't want to waste money on that. So they were just spraying this stuff onto brick walls, and it was falling off. He went to the ethics officer and said, what do I do about this? And Scientologists, being the most ethical people on the planet, said, you'd better leave the country, because he'd given all the money to Florida.
That's such a Scientology response, and that sounds very, very, very familiar with so much of what you've done.
Greatest good for the greatest number of dynamics. The money's gone to Scientology. That's the greatest good for the greatest number of Scientology.
That's what they think. Anna from Canada wants to know, what is the best advice for protesters?
It's who you should be protesting. Now, protests have largely gone against organizations. I think they should go against the whales. They should go against the people who are funding Scientology. So you find out, you get your WISE directory, find out where those businesses are, and you stand outside. We did this thing, my friends Bonnie and Richard Woods did this protest. What had happened was that the churches together in East Grinstead wanted something to do. And I said, well, they've just opened a bookshop. It's the first time they'd ever come into East Grinstead itself. They will put out guys with clipboards, you body routers or body routers, if you prefer the American, and to ask these silly, go and find the body router, go in pairs and hand them this leaflet. And I redrafted the leaflet. It's on the internet somewhere, and I still recommend it as the thing to hand out, because it starts 75 million years ago in this sector of the galaxy, the evil Prince Xenu. And at the end of a little bit more, it says, this sounds like the work of a science fiction author, and it is. So they would hand this, the two of them would say, we're going to spend the day with you. We're going to give this leaflet to everybody you approach. The body router or router would go back into the bookshop, and he wouldn't come out again. Now, we did this, or they did this. I wrote the leaflet. They did this at the Dianetics bookstore, and they did this at the new Chichester Mission. And they closed within a matter of weeks, because you've got to get this. The body router, of course, won't be an experienced Scientologist, because experienced Scientologists can't confront non-Scientologists. True. They call WOGs, which in this country is the N-word. So it'll be newbies who are doing it. You've given them the OT3 material, or enough of it to have a bit of a laugh. They've taken it back in, and they'll either be talking to somebody who's not done OT3, so they say, that's nonsense, it's not true, or somebody who has done OT3, in which case they say, you better not go out there. You've done the person a favor, because they now have to have a class 8 auditor. Once they've been exposed to OT3, they have to pay double for everything. So you've saved them from half of the auditing they can afford. And so their head will get less screwed up. But so it's that focus. It's not so much, it's who you protest against. So if you find the WISE directory, you stand outside the building where the company or corporation is, and whoever goes in, you say, and maybe there's a news leaflet to be said, this person is sponsoring slavery. So you start undermining Grant Cardone and Trish, what's the name? And
Trish Dugan,
$360 million.
Yeah, to Scientology. Nancy Cartwright, over $100 million to Scientology.
Yeah,
that is a great idea. That's a great idea, and that's a good. Like I get that. Yeah,
and always be really friendly, and helpful. Which apostate Alex here, Alex Barnes Ross, got a little bit annoyed with me, because a week before he was doing his protest, I think it was a year ago, last November, I did a video with Spike, who works with me, It's called Why We Don't Protest. And I
Mhm.
recommend that. I still recommend that. Chris Shelton was furious with me. How dare I do this? And I said, did you watch the video? He said, no, I read the description. It's like, I'm explaining why I don't do this. I am not part of the Borg. I have left Scientology. I can say what I like, and I have 40 years experience. And my experience of protests is nobody leaves as a consequence of protests. And what happened when Anonymous were protesting was they scared the wits out of people who are in Scientology and therefore made it harder to leave. There was here in London, they did this thing where they were pointing at a KFC or something going, chicken, 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 and then pointing at the headquarters, or Tottenham Court Road, whatever, cult, cult, cult. And you saw the blinds going down, and the people in there were terrified and felt really justified that they were being harassed. So it's got to be a friendly way round. And then, of course, there's that handsome young man outside the blue buildings who actually became a TikTok star or something as a consequence of talking to protesters, which probably got more recruits for Scientology. So it's thinking about what you're doing and how to focus it, and always remembering, you're there to help the Scientologists. You're not there to express your rage and spleen about Ron Hubbard, David Miscavage, and Scientology. These people are victims, and so help them out if you can, rather than enjoying
Yeah,
being unpleasant.
I've liked some of the approaches with where people let Sea Org members know that freeloader debts are not enforceable. Just like a little tidbit. There are some who live stream and protest, who go around like MD Media, for example, and tell people to have a good day. And it is there. It runs the gamut in multiple things that I've seen. I personally believe the biggest thing that I think protests help is to raise awareness about Scientology, so nobody else comes in or goes in.
Is there anybody that doesn't know yet? When you go onto the internet and you find out about South Park or Aftermath, or it's very hard in this culture. And when I started doing this in '83, there'd been government inquiries and there'd been media, but people still didn't know what it was. And so I set about finding out what it was and putting that out there. A lot of the material that's on the internet now is material that we put on in the 90s. We put the whole 800 pages of the harassment pack. So when I was asked to go and speak at Flag Down by my good friend Pete Griffiths, I said, what do you want to go to Clearwater for? You're just going to antagonize Scientologists. Nobody's going to leave. And it's like, well, we'll get media. And I'm like, what do you need media for? They're not recruiting anymore. Their recruitment lines are completely broken, because if you put the word Scientology into YouTube, you're going to get Natalie Webster. You are. That's what's going to happen. And people these days, everything is checked. So I think getting on the street and doing it is not as important. And let me tell you about the greatest protest that ever happened. And this was Frank Notaro. It was 1986. Frank was an actor and he couldn't get a job. And he'd been in Scientology for like 15 years, Celebrity Centre, and he still couldn't get a job. And then he decided that Scientology was rubbish. So he did a one-man protest at the Blue Buildings. And what he did was he stapled copies of the OT3 materials on the telegraph poles. And then he went out in a little suit that had got ping pong balls on it with BT written on them. This was a brilliant protest. I met him the next week. It was the first time I visited LA in September '86. And he showed me the welts on his body where when they dragged him into the basement of the Blue Building and stuck him with a cattle prod. And he showed me the temporary restraining order that he couldn't go near the building. So
wait. They took somebody who was outside protesting and dragged him into the Blue Buildings and used a cattle prod on him.
Yes, I saw these horrific bruises on his body. This was in August or probably September 1986.
Wow, it is crazy how much. I mean, and I think too, John, getting the word out with social media, with all these different platforms, that's one thing. You might have one person outside protesting, but it's seen by so many people. And I got to tell you, there are still many people that don't know Scientology is a cult. they still are infiltrating schools. They still are
Oh,
infiltrating
I know, yeah.
different
Criminon,
programs and Boy
knocking on, yeah.
Scouts. Yeah, exactly. So I
But
think,
you
I would
go to the
totally disagree.
schools, you go to the schools and let them know. We've got a thing going on here,
Mhm.
which is Criminon has gone into the UK prisons, and it's being sponsored by various charities who don't realise that it's Scientology. So
Yeah.
whenever you find something out like that, write to your congressman.
Mhm.
Absolutely, provide material. And protesting is not bad or wrong. It's just having the most impact with what you're doing, and so having material to hand out, something short and straightforward that explains what
Mhm.
Scientology is, and this focus. I think that now, absolute central focus is human trafficking.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
as Aaron says, just about every time he's on the air,
Yeah.
bless him, it's human trafficking,
Mhm.
and there are now 4,000 slaves in this group. So, but there's a balance, that there are difficulties. One of the problems that I've heard frequently from, I call you a born in, not a second gen. I don't like that, because you know, second gen, that's boring. You're a
I know, I
born in.
don't like it either.
No, there are never ins and there are born ins,
Mhm.
and then there are recruits like me, people who are conned in, probably.
Conned in.
And dealing with born ins, there is a problem that if you give a, a bad rep to Scientology generally, they, as kids in public schools, can really have a hard time. I mean, I've talked with a lot of people who, when it was found out that they were Scientology kids, they were ostracized by the other kids. So part of it, there has to be a compassionate element where you're always thinking about the benefit of the victim,
Mhm.
rather than, you know, we're having a fun day out or what have you. So I'm not against protesting. I'm not against letting people know. It's just, you
Do
know,
it respectfully and remember that many of them are victims. Yeah, no, I
yeah.
would agree with that completely. Today, with social media, with things like TikTok and here on YouTube, younger people, you know, the Gen Alphas, the Gen Zs, the young, well, millennials, especially, I feel like younger millennials and Gen Zs, it's like so much of their information is gotten from social media. So when they see a little TikTok about like these are some culty things, I feel like that's how younger generations are learning about cult and are finding out. And I think that's why it's so important for people to continue to talk about it on whatever platform they're on in any way that they can, whether it's outside a Scientology organization or sitting here on social media, on YouTube or different platforms, and continuing to get this information out. Sharing even what you know and what you've shared, I mean, is such an eye opener for people who might be questioning, like, oh my gosh, my family's in Scientology. I, don't want to rock the boat, but I don't know. And I'm not sure. And you find out the truth about L. Ron Hubbard and the history of Scientology. I think that's very effective as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's spread the information. I
Mhm.
beginning of about a year ago, February last year, I did a recording with um, a YouTube channel called Lad Bible,
Oh,
and
yeah. Yeah. I remember that.
yeah, and it's unbelievable. We've now had, I looked today, 792,000 views on that talk. And
Wow.
so Lad Bible, of course, was set up by some lads who were,
Mhm.
you know, teenagers at the time. It's now they've got their own TV studio and all of this stuff,
Yeah.
and it was all very professionally done. But that's the kind of place to take it, and you know, taking it to Joe Rogan or anywhere and everywhere. And I think there is now a very different feeling towards Scientology, and I do worry that Scientologists will be persecuted, will be ridiculed, rather than being treated compassionately. And I've often been called an anti-Scientologist. I'm not. I've always been a pro-Scientologist. What I found out was to help Scientologists, and slipping into that black and white thinking that
Yeah.
they're the enemy. It's not them. It's not even David Miscavige. David Miscavige was brought up inside this bubble.
Mhm.
And I've said it before, I probably said it when we spoke last week. But if David Miscavage would like to call me up, as long as he promises not to shout at me, I would be perfectly happy to help him. Because I do really believe in redemption. I think he should go to prison, but I think they should still allow him to have cake once a week.
He could redeem himself in prison. And you do make a good point, remembering that. And that's a balance. I mean, I know when the protests first started, I was just so amazed at, the idea of, I had never protested Scientology before. And now I've protested at 5 different orgs now in different states. And it was
do you get a little badge for each one that you
I want one.
I protested Seattle.
I want one. But it was very much, as a former member and growing up in Scientology, it was an incredibly freeing experience. But I also found myself realizing too, especially when I'm in Clearwater at Flag there over by the Sandcastle, where they're delivering the upper levels and stuff. Yeah. I like to let them know too, David Miscavige is a squirrel. Elon Hubbert said, no fundraising. There's all these different contradictions about it, but also I would find myself too having to remember, hey, these are also victims of Scientology, and you could see it on their faces and in their energy or lack thereof. When you would see them, it's really heartbreaking. They're so beaten down. Sea Org members are not walking around being all bubbly and happy. You don't really often see that. You just don't. It's really sad. So I think that's a good point to remember, that if you are protesting, to try and maintain or remember the compassion while also sharing the truth about Scientology and educating.
And I mean, as you know, I spent about 6 months on the board of the Aftermath Foundation last year, and I was as polite and political as I could be. I called Aaron up and said, would it be all right? And he said yes. And I said, I'll be there if you need to relay any concerns, because I joined because I saw this split, which makes no sense to me. I've been doing this forever. Arnie Lerma said of me, before the internet and safety in numbers, there was Jon Atack. And that's almost true. There were periods where there was certainly nobody else in this country. There were periods when there was nobody else in Europe, really. And it was oppressive. It was awful. It was difficult. So I've seen protests come and go. You say when the protest started. Well, I was on a protest in December 1983. The
recent incarnation of all of it. Yeah.
With Captain Bill.
Nice.
And he'd got placards. He got freedom, not greedom, and auditing, not frauditing. And that's when I first met Warren McShane, when I handed in the petition, and he pushed me, and the police had come, and there was this tiny little policewoman, and I went to her and said, he just pushed me. That's assault. And Warren McShane's big guy, with he got stripes on his uniform and all of this, military uniform. And she came up to him and she went, "Don't you do that again." It was great. But so yeah, protesting.
Just
respectfully.
Yeah, exactly. I think so too. There's so many things that are going on, and seeing too, just even that aspect of it, of having fun in front, like in Clearwater, it's a retirement town, and I feel like the protesting reflects that. It's very chill and laid back. But the biggest thing too is, it just has to be absolutely hated by the powers that be and David Miscavige and whatnot. They don't want people out there and, they hide Scientologists from the protesters, especially Sea Org members. So they don't hear or they don't see, when my daughter was training at Flag, she said they were not allowed to leave the building if there were protesters out there, and they were told that they were dangerous, that it was a physical safety thing. And then you realize well, those people don't look very, mean or unsafe or any of those.
Be friendly. I mean, with Aftermath, it was nothing to do with me, but just after I joined, they put up the billboard in LA.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, with Phil Jones.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Phil was just brilliant. And I hope that what happened with him was that he did a PTS Type A deal, that so that he would withdraw from protesting and his kids would now talk to him. I'm hoping that that's what happened there. You know how that I've done that with people in the past.
Yeah, no, his kids are still not talking to him.
Oh no.
No, Phil Jones
Oh.
is very much still protesting. Phil Jones is still here on YouTube putting out regular content about Scientology. No,
so
his
awful.
kids are completely still kept from him.
And as you say, David Miscavige is a squirrel, because policy says that if somebody does go public, then you have to get, they can't, the kids can't do any more Scientology until they handle him. So this is squirreling.
Exactly.
I think let's have a committee. You do know that I declared David Miscavige suppressive. Do you know about that?
Oh, did you? Did you do a whole issue?
I was the chairman of the OT Committee UK. And so I got somebody who'd been on the Watchdog Committee, Vince Barnes. So he'd been, one of the 14 overlords of Scientology, working directly for Hubbard before Miscavige had any power. That he worked for them. And he was around, and he'd done the flag executive briefing course. So I got him and a bunch of people. I invited David Miscavige to come, and he didn't answer. He's so rude. And of course, I could then just have declared him for failing to turn up for his committee of evidence, but I decided, no, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt. So we heard the evidence, or they heard the evidence. I wasn't on the committee. And, they'd done a proper bill of particulars, and they did findings and recommendations. And then I issued a goldenrod, I think it was June 84, declaring him a suppressive for the various reasons. And we then sent it to all of the Scientology orgs. And I was told that in Chicago, they cheered when it arrived. Yeah, we knew he was rotten.
Yeah, they know.
Yeah.
It's really interesting too with these days of social media, and I think about the kids and the grandkids, the second and third generation Scientologists who are, just completely living on their phones and on social media. And the way the algorithm works is it doesn't differentiate between, oh, this is good Scientology versus this is not for Scientology. So I like to think that they're getting regularly exposed to a lot of information that their parents aren't telling them, and they're looking at it online, because that is where a lot of people, especially younger people, get all their information. Now they're not watching, that they've cut the cord, they're streaming, they're not doing cable. They're finding it all out on social media.
Yeah. And I think that, that's going to bring about a world of change. I think it does mean that we need to be a little considerate towards one another. And this is why I came onto your channel, because you were talking about the Jenna Aaron situation and saying, let's have a heart here. Let's not get into people's business. And I think there's been way too much of this hatred blowing about. Now think about some second generation, some born in, and they go on social media and they see one former member ripping another former member, and they go, yeah, I've been told the right things. These people are crazy.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, it does mean that we've got to be better than anybody else on earth. We've got to be really nice. But with kindness as your king, you will reach heaven before you reach your end, to quote Dave Matthews. What a beautiful line that is.
Very true. Tori, Tori.
I do. She's fantastic. I
Tori
love
Crispin,
her. Yeah.
Tori Magoo 44
Yeah.
here on YouTube.
Yeah.
Tori shares a story of when she was on the opposite side, still a Scientologist, and a protester said to her 2 or 3 times, very nicely, if you really are free, why can't you read anything you want?
Yeah.
And he said this to her a couple of times, at the picket line.
This is, and Andreas Heldel Lunte was talking with her, and she said that it was Andreas who set up Xenu.com or whatever it was, the Norwegian site, who's absolutely a wonderful, wonderful man, the late. And she started saying things, and he was like, you shouldn't use capital letters because that's considered shouting.
Because she didn't know.
We had them both at Toronto, and Tori spoke there, so she's on record there. But it was great. He'd come all the way over. They'd never actually met, And that was just, it was a wonderful meeting. But
yeah. But she said that that really impacted her, you know, that message and her sharing that story. I think it helped some people who were protesting to kind of remember that, like, they'll listen. They're more likely to listen if you're delivering the message in a way that's not completely shutting them off. They do hear it. And I've spoken with people who have since left Scientology and some who are, you know, wanting to leave under the radar. And because I've asked them, I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts on, you know, what you're seeing in protests? And a lot of them are saying similar. We're saying the biggest thing for them, the biggest plus for them was that they didn't feel like they were going to be alone if they left, that there were so many people on the outside. And I think that what social media has done for the anti-Scientology movement or exposing Scientology and other cults has been providing easily accessible information in an easy way to so many people. And there are so many people, the vast majority of people on my channel have never been in Scientology, but are all in on ending this cult. And through social media, through YouTube, that it builds such a community. And when I do interviews of former members, one of the biggest things many of them have said has been how welcomed they felt and not judged by people in the chat, by people asking questions and watching the video. And it gave them strength. They would see other people being supported that way. So kind of to your point, that's the truth. They want to, that's why I'm so strict on my channel. I'm like, no, we're not doing the hate.
no,
There are places for that if you want to go do that. And in large part because I'm here to expose Scientology and cults and help as many people as I can. And if you create an environment and a space that is repulsive, people are not going to want to come to that or seek any kind of help. And it's just amazing that level of support that really is available. People never in Scientology who fully support people getting out. And that is a message I hope to continue to share, that I always try to get out so that they don't just see one or two or see somebody doing the opposite and think that that's all that's out there. And it's so simple. If we can just, be kind. And again, when you show up, you can protest Scientology, but do it in a way that, I agree, to be more effective. There was a time where I even was enjoying some of the more aggressive, antagonistic style of protesting more because I was liking that they're, giving it back to them. It's like so many of us were bullied by Scientology or harassed. I mean, obviously yourself for so many years, but now there is a safety in numbers. There are so many people who are out and speaking, but more importantly, in my mind, there are so many people never in Scientology supporting this community, supporting people leaving cults, and soon to be former members, recent former members, like they see that. And I think it's really exciting to be able to have that today and not be alone. Like you said, you were one of the only people. You were alone. It was easy for Scientology to attack you. Whereas now it's like, oh, you want to go after Jon? Well, you got to come at me too. You got to come at this person, that person. You take one of us out, there'll be 10 more. There'll be other people showing up to talk about this, to share their stories. It's not going to end because if I stop doing it tomorrow, there will continue to be more people, just like how you've done this for such a long time. And Tori has done it for such a long time. I look forward to, one, never having to do it again, but having more people like that want to do that and expose Scientology. So I want to give just mad props and shout out to everybody who does that, whether they're protesting, whether they're on social media making videos, whether they're calling into city councils, whatever you're doing to help move that needle is so appreciated. Even people who are here liking the video and watching and subscribing, it all helps.
And do keep sending the money to me. Because that's the main love energy of the universe. One of the things I've got to say is after 40 years of doing this, that only one former member has ever given me money. And there is a presumption. I got really seriously attacked in 2013-14 that I should do this for free. and I have done. I'm deeply in debt. I have no pension. But then it was like, well, you shouldn't be charging money for your books. It's like, it took me 6 years to research that book, and people have put it up free online. And I'm kind of going, it's mine. How can you do this? You're ripping me off for the benefit of. So, please send your checks to me. No, we were going to somehow say something about this thing that Marty Rathbun.
Oh, that's right. Because we were going to talk about how, and we should probably make that our last thing, because we're taking almost 2 hours here.
Yeah.
The ways, if Scientology cannot intimidate you or bully you into submission, into not talking about them, and if you create enough of an effect, as far as they're concerned, they will go another route, and that's to buy you off. Yes. You were offered money.
Yes, in 1994, a gentleman called Greg Ryerson called me up, and I had the tape running. I've still got it somewhere. And he, I was told, was the 10th mission to destroy me, to have come out of international headquarters. So 9 had failed, and he succeeded in stopping me eventually for a while. But he said, look, John, you're a painter. Yeah, we can find a gallery owner who will buy paintings from you every month, and all you have to do is be silent. And I'm not going to say it on air because it's rude, but I told him the first word begins with an F and the second begins with an O. I was just like, what a despicable and disgusting thing. Then, of course, you find, that there have been so many payoffs. Vicky Asnaran, having been Inspector General, which I think is a term from the Inquisition originally, having been Inspector General of the Religious Technology Center, she sued them. And then suddenly she was very quiet. And Mike Rinder was offered $5 million.
That's right.
And said no. And he wasn't even speaking out at the time. They were so scared. So the thing I heard over the weekend, which was completely new to me, I talked with somebody who knew Marty Rathbun very well after he left Scientology to become the savior of independent Scientology. You'll forgive me, he's not somebody I like. There are very few people in the world that I have taken a dislike to, but Marty is definitely one of them. A preening narcissist.
Just so people have the context.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, of course.
Was the right hand of David Miscavage. He was the enforcer. Marty Rathbun was the boogeyman for many people in the Sea organization. He left Scientology, turned whistleblower, and eventually turned against people who were whistleblowing.
And he wrote 3 books after leaving, which are, it was the first time I've read a lot of autobiographies of Scientologists. I don't read them all anymore. There are too many of them. But it was the first time that I couldn't finish the book. I just felt that I was being told, this guy definitely had an agenda. Now, so what I heard over the weekend from somebody who knew him very well was that he had said to them that he would do the heavy lifting in the Office of Special Affairs. And what he meant by that was if there were any dirty tricks to be performed, David Miscavige would go to Marty and say, this is what we're going to do. Marty would then hire the detective through a law firm or whatever, or he'd do it himself. And he said, what's highly relevant about this is that he'd do the heavy lifting because Mike Rinder wouldn't. Mike Rinder would not do these horrible things. So this is it's a new idea that's come into the discussion because Mike, of course, has been somewhat ferociously attacked, which is understandable because, how could he have not known about these things? Well, he could have not known about these things. He was doing legal and public relations. Of course, in the old time, the Guardian's office, these departments were kept very separate. And these days, where harassment used to be done by what's called branch 1 of the Guardian's office, covert data collection, that has been farmed out. And so people like Gene Ingram, he did quite a lot of it. He came to this very house, actually, and knocked on the door to talk to my parents and accused them of their tomato plants being cannabis plants, which I thought was strange. He obviously had been smoking the wrong thing. But my father was terminally ill, and he doorstopped my mother and to say all of these horrible things. He traveled all over the world, and that's how he was a disgraced LAPD officer. That's how they do it these days. But it was interesting that this was Marty admitting that he was the conduit for this, not Mike. And so I don't know where he is now. I think he was chased out of the building. And as you say, he started attacking people who were criticizing Scientology, and then he disappeared into thin air. So I hope he's watching this. Hi, Marty. And, you know, if people want to go after somebody, go and find Marty.
Jon Atack.
Kindness. Kindness.
Be kind for Marty, but F that Rathbun dude.
and offer him, you know, a cup of tea and
exactly.
Ask him if he'd like to write up his overts and withholds. You know, who knows?
Yeah, I think we'll all be holding our breath for a while on, you know, on that one, but it'll be an ongoing conversation, definitely, for sure. Jon, I so appreciate you joining us again, and I know we will do it again. I really appreciate it. Everybody, I so appreciate you guys being here as well. Please be sure to hit that like and hit that subscribe as well. And you can find Jon. I'm going to share, if you go to his website here, everything is on there. You can find out all his socials, his YouTube channel. You can get links to, you can click on books. Then you can see all of his books. You can go ahead and buy his books and throw all kinds of money at Jon.
Yeah, give me the money. Yeah, the governing policy of any religion: make money, make more money, make others produce so as to make even more money. And this, for anybody who's not familiar with the sacred scripture of Scientology, is a policy letter by Ron Hubbard called Governing Policy. The governing policy of Scientology is make money. There was a Kerry Gleason, who was the executive director international of Scientology. Yes. I was told this story that one day Hubbard said to him, so what's the important thing in Scientology? What's the purpose of Scientology? And Kerry Gleason said, it's to help people, sir. And Hubbard said, no, it's to make money. And Kerry said, I see what you mean, to make money and help people. And Hubbard said, no, Kerry, it's to make money.
Son of a bitch!
A world without war, insanity, crime, or L. Ron Hubbard.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Thanks, Jon. You hold tight. Everybody, thank you so much for being here. And please go ahead and share this video. Continue to get the word out. Thank you for all that you guys do. And I hope you all get out tonight and have an amazing cult-free evening.